Hello there, and welcome to the Right to Read initiative. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and I am so glad you've decided to join me today to learn my thoughts about reading. Now, I never like just talking straight by myself for an hour, so I've invited my friend Nathaniel Hansford to join me from Reading by the Science and the Pedagogy Non-Grata site to help me explain my thoughts. So thank you for joining me today, Nate. How are you?
Good. I used to track how often we did these things, but we've done so many collaborations now, I've really lost track.
Yeah, me too. But I think we have good chemistry together, and we have a similar outlook for what we want.
Exactly. Definitely.
All
All
right. Well,
right.
so when it comes to my thoughts about reading, I was thinking about how to go about this last night, actually. And the thing that I came up with as a good starting point is your first experience with something kind of colors your perspective on it for life. And it's very hard to change that perspective without a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I think it's true for many things. Like if you go to a restaurant and you have a bad first experience, are you going to go back? Not likely, at least not by choice. Or, a bad first impression. And that's what my first impression was of reading, right? I'm an individual with severe dyslexia, and learning to read was a tremendous effort for me, very difficult. And I failed several times with several things that were the sure fixed. So that means that my look is a little bit jaded, and I do acknowledge that I do have the bias as my perspective is a perspective as an individual with severe dyslexia who has family members with dyslexia, who has been working with individuals with dyslexia as an interventionist, as a consultant, as a friend, as an advocate, basically my entire life, like definitely my entire adult life. So I've seen the cases where it's been really difficult. But then as my journey as a parent, one of my children is one of those kids that figured it out before kindergarten. So I know what it looks like when it works great. And the kids are in that top 5% that just figure it out with very limited explicit instruction where they're getting that explicit grapheme phoneme correspondences. I mean, yes, through exposure in the home, that child has received that to an extent, but not the same as classroom instruction. Mm-hmm. So, acknowledging that my view on reading is based on my own experiences. And I think it's important to state that, just because I feel everybody has that bias when it comes to reading. And it's through their experiences with learning to read and the individuals around them learning to read that color their lens on reading. And the other thing is, I had teachers in my experience where it was okay that I didn't learn how to read. Mm-hmm. Because there are some people that feel that there are just some individuals that cannot learn how to read. Mm-hmm. And while that is true, I think the percentage is something that we need to negotiate, because some schools, some districts, some teacher education programs are okay with a higher percentage, looking at, 40%, 30%, in high risk neighborhoods. They're not okay. They'd rather higher percentages, but we're seeing maybe 40% of students become fluent readers. And to me, that's not okay. Mm-hmm. And when you look at learning to read, we want to make sure that the individual can comprehend spoken language. Because if they cannot comprehend spoken language and communicate, well, they don't have to be able to communicate with spoken language, but they have to be able to comprehend spoken language to learn how to read. Because if they can't, then it's not going to happen. That's something that we have to accept, right? And they have to have the ability to comprehend more than just a few words. We also need to have an individual to have adequate working memory and processing speed in order for them to learn. Now, there are individuals that this does not happen, and there are individuals who have head injuries or strokes, and that has a problem with the area of the brain that is used for reading. So acknowledging that there is a small percentage of individuals that cannot read, we need to focus on the 95, 98% of individuals that can learn how to read and make sure our instruction is targeted so that we have the highest success rate from the start.
Yeah. If I could just comment, I've always had that 95% estimate that I've seen. I think it's the IDA that promotes that 95%. And people act like that's a really aggressive amount, but I actually think saying 5% of kids won't learn how to read is too high. I really don't know where that comes from. And I've worked in really high needs environments for students with intellectual disabilities. I met students with severe intellectual disabilities. We're talking about IQs of 60 who can read. So if a student with an IQ 60 or lower who's barely verbal can read, I'm fairly certain almost all normal functioning adults can learn how to read, or children.
Yeah, well, I think it depends what we're looking at as for classroom instruction, whereas intensive intervention.
That's a good point. That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
So 95% of students should be able to learn how to read with quality classroom instruction. There are individuals that are going to require that more intensive support.
That makes sense.
Right? I'm not saying that they can't learn how to read, but they're not going to learn how to read in that group setting. It's that intensive one-on-one situation that they're going to need that support.
That makes sense.
And having the instruction definitely tailored to their needs. That being said, there is so much that we can do. And I'm really passionate about early identification and intervention. And I'm not talking about early identification of giving a 4-year-old a diagnosis of a specific learning disorder or dyslexia because they're showing risk factors. Just as we're not going to diagnose an individual who shows risk for heart failure as an individual in congestive heart failure or that they've had a heart attack, right? We're saying that we're seeing these early indicators of this happening. And looking back, those were identified in myself in preschool to my parents, but they didn't know what was happening. I mean, it was the 80s and things are different now. And we know better now as a society, and we need to be able to do better. So if we're able to identify those early risk factors and make sure the appropriate support is in place when it's most effective, then we're going to have higher success rates. We're going to have healthier children.
So what are those risk factors in pre-kindergarten? I would not know how to identify a student that young.
Well, I've actually done it with several children just by being a parent and being exposed to young ones through various activities that I've done. And the first major red flag for me is their language and listening to them speak, right? Dyslexia is primarily a phonological processing deficit. And that phonological processing begins from a young age. And if they're struggling to hear the difference between sounds that are similar, you're going to hear that in their speech patterns. So it's very important as adults around them not to mimic their speech mistakes. And yes, it's cute. The kid says hamburger or hamburger or something like lello.
It's so cute. Let's be honest.
It's terribly cute, especially when it's your own child. But it's important to model the proper input so that you're getting that. And as soon as you notice that there's that, the speech isn't super clear. Like obviously when we're talking about a 2-year-old who's just learning how to speak and they're playing with sounds or, the 1 to 2 years old, I'm not too concerned about that range. But once they start to get 3 or 4 and they're still making those mistakes, yes, there are sounds that are not developmentally appropriate for them to have mastered. And that's fine. Specifically like those are pretty tricky for them to figure out. But then there's individuals that have substitutions that just aren't right or not ones that you would expect for how that sound is formed. And that's when first thing you want to do is a hearing screen, right? Make sure that they're hearing the sounds properly. Their children are notorious for having ear infections, especially ones that adults around them aren't aware of. So there are some individuals that are going to need to get their ears tubed to help drain the excess fluid that's inhibiting the sound. And then that's going to make a huge difference. And then others, it's not their ears. It's not their ability to hear the sound. It's their ability to understand the sound and how it's produced. So when we start doing work with a speech and language pathologist and work on that articulatory training or that working on the speech sound production, that's going to help them early on. And this is something that can be done in group settings. All of my children have received some level, I have 3 children, all have received some level of speech and language support just because of my personal experience and me being dyslexic puts them at risk for being dyslexic. And one of them is, but I recognize those speech sounds issues. So I wanted to get on them early. Luckily where I live, that's just part of under 5 care. If your child has a speech issue, that they get to work with a speech and language pathologist. If you're able.
Would you recommend formal screening in pre-K, or would you more recommend teachers be on the lookout for warning signs?
In a perfect world, I'd say formal screening.
Starting in pre-K. Okay.
In kindergarten, at least in British Columbia, the kindergarten students get their hearing, their teeth, and their eyes checked. Every student across the province, unless the parent says, I don't want it.
But would you want like formal screening for phonological difficulties?
Yes.
Okay.
It's quick. It's simple. And it's not going to take a lot of time. It's going to just add an extra couple minutes onto that screening process. And the impact that we can have in those early years is huge. And just because they have some phonological processing deficits in preschool doesn't guarantee that they're going to have later reading issues, but giving them that support isn't going to harm them.
No, it's a really good point.
Right. And at that young age, it's picked up so much easier, and it's part of everyday activities that you're doing with these kids anyways, maybe just a little bit more with some of those that are super concerned. That's going to make their future that much brighter.
Yeah, I'm really glad you shared this with me, because there's some programs that advocate for not starting until grade 3 for intervention, which absolutely is not supported by the research. We show much higher outcomes if we support the students before grade 3. But I was kind of curious about when it is best to start, because I've never seen any research on like what is the ideal age to start. We just know that it's definitely not grade
Earlier
3.
the better.
We know it's better to do it early. But I was curious as how early is too early. But a 1
or a 2-year-old, I'm not going to worry about it. 3-year-old, again, that's too early. We need to have this individual at the cognitive maturity that they can start taking this support. So typically, speech and language pathologists don't usually work with children until they're about 2.5.
Okay.
Just because they're not at the place where they can receive the instructional support. Right. But that being said, a parent getting the knowledge in those strong start programs or those early years programs, in the library, through their pediatrician, through their general practitioner, learning that we need to have this language play that was so prevalent in the, last century and the centuries before with rhymes. But unfortunately, now it's being replaced by screen time where it doesn't necessarily have those. Like those nursery rhymes are essential. And a lot of kids will go in and not even know them.
It's a really interesting point.
We need to make sure that they have, the understanding of them, and parents may not remember them, right? And now, the television babysitter, right, is not the same as sitting in the car and listening to the songs, and singing them as a family on the car rides. And I'm guilty of it. We did nursery rhymes and that sort of thing, but I didn't do them to the extent that I have. I mean, it's the same thing when we look at coloring and playing with Play-Doh, right? Those are crucial things that we need to get our young children doing, so they develop the fine motor skills that they need for writing, right? For printing, and the muscles, instead of slouching on the iPad or being in front of the television. And I know it's hard, especially with, our COVID kids, dealing with the realities that has been our world for the past, I guess almost 3 years now.
Yeah.
But recognizing and acknowledging that this generation of kids is having a very different childhood than most. I know my youngest just turned 3 when the lockdown came in, and she didn't have the same experiences as my other two, because we couldn't do the gymnastics and the ballet and the sports that my older two did, because they just weren't available. And it wasn't even a time thing. It's just the community centers just weren't running the programs because of COVID safety protocols.
Yeah. I just was reading the other day that speech and language pathologists are reporting that kids are quieter in the classrooms now, that they're talking less in the early grades, and that they seem to have lower vocabularies, which is sort of a horrifying long-term consequence of this. And then you look at the national reading levels that just came out. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? And something like 60% of United States students were reading below grade level, which is just horrifying.
Atrocious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, we can do better and we should do better. It's making sure that we have the knowledge too. So learning to read is the most studied topic in education.
Definitely.
There has been study after study for over a century on reading development and how we learn how to read. Now, not every one of those studies is quality, and we're not going to cherry pick a study to meet our beliefs. You and I have spoken about the importance of meta-analyses and taking the information from those studies to help provide guidance on best practices. And it's not just taking one study from one field, it's a multidisciplinary field. And we need to take the information from those various settings and recognize what's best for getting the most students to learn how to read the first time they are taught.
So is that a balanced approach that takes in a holistic view of language and uses 3 cueing alongside of phonics? Or if there's any listeners listening, you must not be guilty.
Yeah, definitely not. And I was horrified to see bookmarks that were sent home with children this year with that picture cueing as a first strategy on the top of the bookmark. And I honestly thought that in 2022 we were past that, but is still happening in schools across Canada. I'm willing to bet across other countries too. And it is well established that that is not the best go-to strategy if you're struggling to read a word, because it can only work for so long. It is not how we orthographically map words. And it's the strategy that poor readers default to. And that doesn't mean we should teach it to all readers because it works for poor readers, because it really doesn't. We want to be teaching readers from the start how to be the best reader possible. So we should be teaching them the strategies that the best readers use.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that you would think that most schools are using like a systematic phonics approach now, but I put up a poll on my Twitter yesterday on does your school board mandate systematic phonics instruction? And the majority of people said no. And several people wrote, my school mandates whole language approaches.
Yeah.
I was about a third of people said yes. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the third, but it's that other 2/3 that I'm a little concerned about.
Yeah. And, again, my personal biases come in from my own personal experience and the individuals that I've worked with. And that's not good enough. And, the thing that I want to talk about is systematic instruction. And, the big thing that is often brought up as an opposition is it takes away the teacher's autonomy. Teachers have an impossible job and they don't have the time, funding, or resources to get 100% for every student. I acknowledge that. It's not an easy job. It is very difficult. You have so much put on you. And there are many teachers out there that are set up to fail from day one before they even enter their classroom, just because of the composition of their classes and the lack of supports and resources in place. And that's something that I fully acknowledge. But one of the best things that we can do to help them is making sure they have the resources for success for their students and saying, okay, well, you know what? Do what you want. You can figure it out. Like, it'll be okay. We trust Pinterest. We trust teachers pay teachers and whatever other resources you happen to have success for your students. And to me, that's not good enough. And that's how we have the high burnout rate, and the stress load on teachers is enormous. Teacher education programs as a whole are not preparing teachers to teach their students how to read. And that's horrible. We're saying, okay, you're a professional, but you don't have all the resources to do your job as a professional. I wouldn't expect there to be a medical doctor that does not have the biology training and the anatomy training and say, you know what? I'm sorry, we didn't think anatomy was important for your year of your training. So we're okay without a thorough knowledge of anatomy. It's okay, whatever you find on Pinterest, and doctors pay doctors.
Can I comment on that? I just, for starters, my education program, the word science of teaching was never once mentioned. We didn't have any instruction on that whatsoever. Vast majority of my classes were like, this is a lesson plan. Here's your homework. You're going to write 25 lesson plans using this format. And like, there was nothing about the science of teaching in there. And this idea, like autonomy, meaning like we're professionals, therefore we have professional knowledge, and therefore we can do whatever we want, is crazy. Because one, we don't have professional knowledge because the school's training teachers are not providing professional knowledge, and no other profession works that way. Your dentist doesn't show up and say, you know what, I feel best practice is this based off my personal experience. I haven't opened any books on how to do dentistry. The same as your doctor, your vet. No other profession operates that way, that they just get to do whatever they feel like without any reference to any type of science or best practices. Like, that's a ridiculous concept.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Sorry, I've gotten very animated.
No, that's totally fine. I remember being my teacher education program and all of us going into our practice, like our first 2-week practicum, we're like, what are we supposed to do? Like, we don't get it. And then, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't feel prepared.
There was a teacher at my college of teachers who drove their truck through the front doors of the teacher building because they were so angry about this issue. And the professors shared that story with us and be like, the truth is, we can't teach you how to teach. You just have to feel how to teach. That was the response to that incident. Anyways.
Well, maybe feeling how to teach, but not what to teach. And the reason why I'm so this systematic explicit phonics, I think the ministries or whoever is in charge of designing the curriculum where you live need to lay out a scope and sequence that is expected for each grade level. And it's not to take away your autonomy, it's to give students in whatever area that school mandate or that curriculum mandates, whether they are in a small hamlet in the middle of nowhere that no one knows the name of, or a metropolitan center. We know that, okay, these students, by the end of the first term should have this concept mastered, and we should have these grapheme phoneme correspondences, because especially for a language like English that has that deep orthography, right? Meaning that it's not transparent. You just can't learn that A says ah and the other 25 letters and you're good to go. No, it's deep. There's more than just understanding your letter sound correspondences. We need to have a common standard to know where students are going to be at in their reading development, because this is something we can't leave to chance.
Yeah.
Right. And that means that the next year's teacher says, oh, I don't really know what they did last year. What am I supposed to do? Okay, no, they finished this grade. These are the letter sound correspondences that they should have down, the morphemes that they should know. And you know what? If they don't by the end of the school year, well, that's when we need to do intensive summer intervention. And that needs to be publicly funded. I am sickened by the fact that parents have to spend their own after-tax dollars to make sure their child learns how to read. Yes, there are families that can afford it, but they shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
The reading is a basic human right. And it is something that, at least in Canada, the government has said they have responsibility for, and they should be held accountable for that responsibility, especially when it's something that we can do, right? We can reach that 95% or 98% or whatever success rate in public education systems. We have seen this across Canada, across North America, across the world. Does it take work? Yes, it does take work. It's going to take intensive training for teachers to to upskill to that point. But even with a little bit of support to get there, things can be so much better, right? So it's not like we're asking them to fly to the moon, but not giving them a spaceship, right? Because teaching reading is rocket science. But we're giving them everything that they need, or I would like it if we were giving them everything that they needed so that they could be successful, meaning that their students could be successful, meaning that their stress load could be diminished, hopefully reducing the burnout rate and their own life stress. And, something that I don't think people understand is they're not, well, some people know about it, but the damage that not learning to read does to an individual and how quickly that changes to behavioral issues, right? Or avoidance issues or depression or anxiety or some combination of anything that I've listed, right? When we look at at-risk youth, whether they have dyslexia or they just haven't learned how to read, that's a high percentage. If we look at the incarceration rate, so the people that are imprisoned, there is a high percentage, more than the 20% that could have a specific learning disability in reading, can't read. So that's injustice, right?
Yeah. I just out of curiosity, I looked at the stat up while we were talking there. Students with dyslexia are 46% more likely to commit suicide than students who don't have dyslexia. That is monstrous.
Yep. And I know people who have, I know people that have attempted it. I know the personal struggles that failure to read and what it does to your self-esteem puts on a person, and it never goes away. It doesn't. So I'm severely dyslexic, but I also have a Ph.D. I have had very good academic success but my dyslexia has followed me every step of the way, and it hasn't been easy. Right? And then also looking at when individuals are in the prison system, if they get a reading intervention and learn how to read or become a better reader, the chance that they're going to re-offend decreases significantly.
Oh,
So what is that telling you? We
Yeah.
can save money if we teach our kids how to read the first time we do it.
I forget the specific number, but it's like over 90% reduction in recidivism rate
Yes.
if they graduate with like a high school diploma while they're in prison. But you look at Canada, last I checked, there's only one prison left in all of Canada that has a high school diploma program.
Well, and the other thing to mention, I remember I was doing some research for my supervisor during my program, and just looking at prison and the cost to have one individual in the juvenile justice system. So they're not necessarily incarcerated, but having a parole officer or something like that. Did you know that the annual cost to the system could pay for 2 full-time special education teachers? At least it could 10 years ago. I don't know the exact numbers today, but I'm willing to bet it's very similar.
I'm sure it is.
And imagine if we gave every school 2 extra special education teachers to save that one student. And that one student wouldn't need 2 special education teachers dedicated to them full time to get the results.
Yeah.
How much money are we going to save? How many lives are we going to save?
Yeah.
How many families are we going to save?
I really think we need to make that, like, Ontario has got the Right to Read initiative going on right now. Mm-hmm. And I really, 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 really hope part of that is hiring more special education teachers, because I am so pro the science of instruction, but I also think we need the resources to make sure that this is being implemented with individual students, because like you pointed out, there are students who are either have such difficulties that they can't succeed in the regular classroom environment, or they're so far behind because of the current system that they're going to need that extra attention. And I don't think that the average core instruction teacher is going to be able to give them what they need. And I think that's just so sad.
But then we come to training for special education teachers. And unfortunately, they're not getting the training that they need to be successful as well. Whether they have a master's or a Ph.D., most programs are not historically giving that information.
Yeah. Right
now, within the last month or so, we're seeing finally more like the University of Alberta is doing a master's in the science of reading, which is wonderful. But why did it take so long?
Yeah, I have a specialist in reading and a specialist in special education. So it's 6 additional university credits I took after graduating to get those qualifications. And I was never taught once anything about the science of reading or dyslexia really in any of those courses. So case in point. And I know some of the universities in Ontario are openly and aggressively resisting the Right to Read report.
And the thing is, a lot of the courses that I took, yes, there was a little bit on intervention, but a lot of it was on the social and emotional consequences and how to support those issues. Now, yes, we need to deal with the students that are in that place currently today. And that's very important and essential for us to have the supports in place to help those that are already behind and struggling and not reading. But if we put effort into catching them before they fail, I think it was Dr. Pamela Snow who said, build those gates before the waterfall, right? The river for them instead of ambulances at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to do. And when we look at reading and reading instruction, there is a way to do it to promote success. And so when I was in my teacher education program, I started working for Dr. Linda Siegel, and I started helping her with assessments in her reading clinic. So we did a modified assessment to identify individuals with specific learning disorders. She supervised me, and I remember learning the CTOP, which is a comprehensive test of phonological processing 2, test, or the CTOP test called Elision. And this is a phonological awareness test that I fell in love with almost immediately because it could tell me so much about a student and where they were struggling and where I needed to target support. Because what this test is, it starts out by breaking a compound word up into its two base words. So it would be something like say donut. So say donut, Nate.
Donut.
Now say donut without saying dough.
Nut.
Exactly. And then it goes to syllables. So say submit.
Submit.
Now say submit without saying mint.
Sub.
Right. Now we're going to start taking away some of the onset or the first sound. Say car.
Car.
Now say car without saying k.
Arr. Boy, matey.
Yeah, exactly. And then so it takes apart or takes parts of the word away slower. And that's a deletion task. And that's not a task that we need to teach students to mastery, right? That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is that it is an excellent diagnostic tool to get inside how this individual's brain is working and able to manipulate the phonemes. That tells me so much as far as intervention goes. It also highlighted how even after years and years of intervention, and I am a fluent reader, I can read at grade level or above, I can read scientific research papers and that sort of thing and comprehend them. I'm a fluent reader. I'm pretty confident in that now. But I still have a phonological processing deficit. And I've done a lot of work on it, but it's still something that I struggle with. And as a dyslexic, it makes sense. But recognizing that we can use those screening tools to help us inform. And the other thing that I think it's important to remember is that, especially as we get to the older grades, we can't just cherry pick interventions for students. And we can't just assume that this intervention has good results in the research, or maybe it doesn't. But we're going to put all of our students that have reading difficulties in that class, whether they're dyslexic, whether it's vocabulary issue, whether it's comprehension, doesn't matter. Can't read, go on this intervention.
But doesn't a really high quality teacher use observations to detect the student's individual needs and not require screening methods? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, really good high quality teacher.
Program.
Of course they can do that through observation for every single student in their class every year. But who has the energy? And how efficient is that?
I certainly don't. And you know what? First, my biggest problem with that is we're so biased as humans. I'll never forget, I was teaching this grade 2 class, and my principal said you have to assess them formally. And I was like, they're grade 2s. Like, what does it matter what a formal assessment shows? I was one of my first years teaching. And he was like, just do it. And I did it. And then I was like blown away between the difference of what I thought they knew versus what they actually knew. And it turns out I was a really terrible judge of where they were at in their needs. And I'd like to think I'm a fairly good teacher. Like, I'm not a bad guy, I don't think. But I just, ever since that moment, I've been like, yes, okay, we need to have actual assessments. Observation alone is not a valid tool.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing that I wanted to mention about those really good teachers that know what they're doing, because there are, but that doesn't mean their district doesn't buy programs that they have to put students in.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a frustration that I see with several teachers who have gone down the path of the science of reading or structured literacy and learned a lot. But their schools, their districts, their ministries of educations say, well, too bad. This is our program. These are our resources. This is what you're using. And that's incredibly frustrating for everyone. Yeah. And it's a waste of money. But again, personal biases. But But when it's done right, it can go so well. And it's not just the rich upper class neighborhoods that can have these results. I've seen these results in very poor areas with very at-risk students who you don't think will ever have a chance of succeeding. And they still get that magic light bulb moment where it clicks and they turn on and they realize that they're reading and they're so proud. And think of what that can do for the student's confidence.
Mm-hmm. We
just don't go into the classroom and say, oh, this is your postal code or this is your zip code. You're not going to learn how to read. So we're just going to.
I don't think I've ever shared this anywhere before, but I remember the moment I kind of learned how to read. For me, it was like exactly how you just described. It was like a light bulb moment. Yeah. And my teacher had been teaching. I was actually a late reader, and my teacher had been teaching phonics, and I'm very ADD, so I was probably barely paying attention. And I think she just taught us phonics for long enough, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, letters make sounds. And then I realized I could figure out what a word was by sounding it up. I remember just like after that moment, like reading was super easy for me. Like it felt like such like a moment, like the day before I couldn't read any words. And then the next day I could read tons of words. And it was like an epiphany moment. And I don't know if that's normal. I feel like probably most people don't learn to read in like a moment like that. But I remember that was in grade 2.
Yeah. Well, and see, that's the thing. So we need to set up our teachers so they have the knowledge on how to teach these and set our students for success so that they can do well. Instead of teaching them these strategies that only work for some students and assume that if they missed a lesson, they're just going to pick it up through osmosis and just through being in the class and through exposure without having that explicit instruction. Because you know what, if you miss the day where we learn that CK says k, but you only find at the end of a short syllable or a syllable where the vowel is quote unquote short sound. So I mean, that doesn't matter, right? It's not going to affect your spelling. It's not going to affect your reading. And then it's too important of a skill to leave it up to chance. Right. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, even like a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. Yes. But we need to recognize that every single teacher in the system needs to make this change and get this learning. And I can think, like, I've spoken to several people on this podcast, more than 100 by now. And it's important to recognize that even a teacher in their last couple of years of teaching who has been trained in some of these programs that have to work because the money's there, right? And then the name and the reputation is there. They've made that change. They wish they did it earlier. And it's reignited their love for teaching. And I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't retire next year, right?
Pardon me?
I was just saying maybe they shouldn't, the individual says, well, maybe I shouldn't retire next year. Mm-hmm. Or the year after, because I'm getting this love again. Like all of my kids are reading or nearing that goal of everybody reading in the class, especially in those early years. So I don't know. I guess my thoughts about reading are everybody deserves to learn how to read and every teacher deserves to learn how to teach it. And
radical.
Oh, I know. Hey, recognizing that it's going to take work. It's going to make you uncomfortable. It might become a bit of an addiction. You may get a bookshelf a lot fuller and have to buy a second one. There is a rabbit hole, but not being scared to take that first step and don't jump off the deep end, right? There are ways that we can slowly learn about this. And I'm always willing to talk to anyone who's wanting to know that first step that I would recommend taking. And, you know, I'm going to tell you it right now, learn about the Simple View of Reading and Scarborough's Reading Rope. Now, these aren't the end all and be all, but they're great conceptualizations of learning how to read that are just going to be eye-opening if you learn about it with an open mind and take the time to understand what they're saying. And recognizing their implications. Like, I love the simple view of reading because just looking at it and dividing reading comprehension into word recognition and language comprehension, that alone, if we can divide our students into where they fall on the grid on that, whether they're low at both, high at both, low at one, high at the other, that's going to help inform interventions to begin with. Right? And then we can tease it out even more.
I'm confused. I thought I just got books on their level and got it just right at their level perfectly, and they would read through osmosis. Are you telling me that's wrong?
Yes, unfortunately.
I'm in a very sarcastic mood today. I have no idea. Anyone who's listening, I've never been this sarcastic ever before on a podcast episode. So anyone listening must be really confused.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, no, you know what? I tried putting the book under my pillow approach to learning how to read, and it didn't work. Wasn't very comfortable either.
Did you try putting it over your head so that you could, like, the gravity would work for you?
Yeah, I don't know if I tried that method. Maybe that's it.
The one weird trick, everyone.
Yeah. But the thing to recognize is that there are too many stories like mine out there. Well, not necessarily like mine, where they go on to have the academic success that I have been fortunate enough to have. I mean, I was very fortunate in having a family that could afford the interventions and the support. But think of how many kids out there are today that aren't getting the support that they need to learn how to read, and what that is going to do for their future. Yes, there are the Russell Bransons and the Virgin guy.
Last person you want to ask about a celebrity's name. I don't know a single celebrity's name, really. I could list you 5 actors. That's my extent of knowledge about Hollywood.
Yeah, the guy that started Virgin Air and Mobile and whatever. I'm blanking on his name right now. Anyway,
the guy in the space race.
Yeah, or the guy that invented Kinko's. There are some very successful dyslexics, and of course they are. I mean, dyslexics are brilliant, obviously. But unless you are put in a situation that you have the opportunity to succeed, it is very difficult to succeed. And having teachers tell you that you just need to try harder and tell your parents that you're not trying hard enough, that is devastating, because you very, very quickly become learned helpless, right? Yeah. You're like, okay, so I am trying so hard. I am trying incredibly hard, so much harder than everyone else around me. At least that's what it looks like. And I can't get it. So obviously I'm stupid. And what's the point in trying?
The number one story I hear from people when they reach out to me to share their stories of how they got involved in the science reading movement is it's almost overwhelmingly the same story. I feel like I get it over and over again. It's admittedly, I find a lot more women are in the movement than men for whatever reason. Maybe it's just because it's a female dominant field of education. But the story I almost always hear is, I was a mother. My child was not learning how to read in the regular class instruction. Turns out they had dyslexia, and I had to spend thousands of dollars going to private clinics to teach them how to read the right way, because that instruction wasn't provided in school. And I've heard that many times from teachers, and they told me, I felt like a failure as a teacher because I didn't know how to teach my own kid how to read. And here I am as a professional teacher. And that was what sparked my journey. I've heard that story dozens of times. I don't know. It's mind blowing. Almost every person I ask, how did you get involved in this? That's the answer they gave me.
Yep. And you're not the only one that says that. So let's make that change. Thank you so much for joining me today, Nate. And if anybody has any questions about my journey, my views on reading, or would like to come on the podcast, please connect with me through the Right to Read Initiative website, www.write2readinitiative.com.
Well, it was a pleasure to provide your show with more sarcasm.
Thank you.